The ceramic coffee mug in my hand almost slipped from my fingers. It was still warm, steam rising in lazy spirals, but my grip had gone completely numb. Across the polished oak conference table, the new vice president of operations leaned back in his leather chair with the kind of casual arrogance that only comes from someone who has never had to clean up his own mess. "You are dead weight here," he said, his voice carrying that smooth, practiced tone of a corporate surgeon who has delivered this exact speech 100 times before. "Your division is being liquidated, effective immediately. Pack your things and be out of the building by the end of the day." The overhead fluorescent lights hummed with a low, annoying buzz. Someone coughed nervously near the door. My 3 team leaders sat frozen in their chairs next to me, their faces draining of color as they processed what this meant for their families and their careers. But I was not looking at them. I was staring directly at him, Pierce Bradley, the man who had spent the last 6 months systematically dismantling our company. I was doing some rapid calculations in my head. Exactly 48 hours ago, I had signed the final paperwork in a quiet bank office downtown. Exactly 48 hours ago, my investment group had purchased $17 million of active bank debt that this company owed. The ink on the transfer was barely dry, and this arrogant consultant had absolutely no idea what was coming. "My name is Brian Vance. I am 48 years old, and until this very moment, I was the Director of Advanced Development for the Piezoelectric Sensor Division at Nova Dynamics. I had spent 12 years building this division from a tiny, speculative research project into a highly profitable $23 million revenue stream. My background was not privileged. I had worked my way through community college while taking care of my younger sister, Clara, after our mother got sick. Those difficult years taught me to see people, to understand when someone was struggling, and to recognize the value of hard work and loyalty. That empathy had built my division. Every engineer and designer I hired had a unique story, and we created an environment where people felt valued enough to take real technical risks. My mentor, Matthew Preston, had noticed this quality in me. He was the one who promoted me to director, and taught me that a leader's job is to clear the path for his team, not to stand in their way or treat them as overhead. Under his guidance, I learned how to balance research and development with commercial viability, ensuring that our division did not just spend money, but brought in substantial contracts from the beginning. And now, this man, whose arrival 6 months ago had marked the beginning of our destruction, was trying to erase all of it with the stroke of a pen. To understand how we got to this point, I have to take you back 9 months. Our founding chief executive officer, Matthew Preston, who had always supported our research and development, stepped down due to sudden health issues. Everyone in the office knew the board of directors had pushed him out because they wanted quick short-term profits. A new chief executive officer arrived in early September. His name was Ronald Jenkins, and he came from a ruthless private equity background. Jenkins viewed the company not as a group of talented people working toward a common goal, but as a collection of assets to be trimmed and sold for a quick return. In the second week of September, I scheduled a meeting with Jenkins to present our division's performance metrics, our pipeline of upcoming aerospace contracts, and our growth projections. The meeting lasted exactly 8 minutes. Jenkins sat behind his massive desk, barely glancing at the reports I had spent a week preparing. "Brian," he had said, interrupting me mid-sentence, "I appreciate the passion, but Nova Dynamics is a thermal management solutions company. That is our brand. These specialty divisions like yours are just distractions." I argued that we had generated $23 million in revenue the previous year, but he dismissed it, pointing out the high operational overhead of our specialized manufacturing facilities. I left that meeting with a heavy feeling in my chest. Over the next month, Jenkins began shutting down labs and selling off teams to our competitors. Then he brought in Pierce Bradley as the vice president of operations to streamline efficiency. Bradley arrived on a freezing March morning, carrying himself like a corporate conqueror. He was in his early 40s, with sharp, cold features and expensive custom suits. His background was in management consulting, specializing in corporate turnarounds, which is just a polite way of saying he was an expert at cutting payroll and firing people. During our first one-on-one meeting on a Wednesday afternoon, Bradley did not even look up from his laptop when I walked in. He gestured to a chair and immediately started reciting our numbers. He told me our division revenue was $23 million, with operational costs at $18,400,000, leaving a net contribution of $4,600,000. Then he looked at me with cold eyes and said, "Tell me why your division should continue to exist." I gave him our strategic pitch, explaining our aerospace contracts and our valuable intellectual property. He listened with a polite, empty smile, and I knew right then that we were on borrowed time. Over the following 6 months, I watched him systematically eliminate the specialty coatings unit, laying off 37 people, and outsource the fluid systems team, letting go of 21 workers. I knew our sensor division was next, and I had to find a way to fight back. The turning point came on a Tuesday evening in late September, about 6 months after Pierce Bradley had started his campaign of destruction. I was working late in my office, reviewing our quarterly projections, when an urgent email arrived from Wesley Hoffman, the vice president of supply chain at Apex Flight Systems. Apex was our largest aerospace client, relying on our sensors for their flight control units. Wesley wanted to schedule an immediate call to discuss supply chain continuity. Reading between the lines, I knew they had heard the rumors about Nova Dynamics restructuring and were terrified that their sensor supply would suddenly disappear. I sat back in my chair and stared at the dark window, thinking about the consequences. I had started at Nova Dynamics 12 years ago as a junior technician under Matthew Preston, and I had dedicated my entire professional life to this place. If Bradley liquidated us, our clients would scramble, our engineers would scatter to competitors, and our valuable patents would gather dust in a corporate warehouse. I would get a standard severance package, a polite handshake, and a pat on the back. That was the conventional outcome for employees who played by the corporate rules. But I had no intention of playing by their rules. I pulled up the public financial statements for Nova Dynamics. Our company was publicly traded, and the debt structure was detailed in the footnotes of our annual report. Right, there was a revolving credit facility of $17 million from Continental Commerce Bank, issued 3 years ago to finance a previous acquisition. The terms were standard, but they included strict financial covenants and change of control clauses. In my business school days, corporate debt was just a theoretical concept. But looking at those numbers, I realized it was a physical weapon. If I could acquire that debt, I would no longer be just an employee at the mercy of a consultant. I would be a major creditor with legal rights that the executive team could not ignore. The idea seemed crazy at first. I did not have $17 million. But corporate debt does not trade at its full face value when a company is unstable. Given the chaotic restructuring under Ronald Jenkins, the risk profile of Nova Dynamics had increased significantly. I knew the bank might be willing to sell the debt at a discount just to get it off their books. The next morning, I met my old friend Dean Rollins for breakfast at a quiet diner near the financial district. Dean had spent 25 years in commercial banking and understood the mechanics of debt trading better than anyone I knew. We ordered coffee and eggs, the diner smelling of fried grease and stale tobacco, while the autumn wind howled outside. Over coffee, I explained the situation at Nova Dynamics and my plan to buy the bank debt. Dean set his cup down and looked at me as if I had lost my mind. "Brian," he said, "corporate debt acquisition is incredibly complex. You are talking about millions of dollars, heavy compliance, and intense legal coordination." But as we talked, he began to see the logic. He confirmed that Continental Commerce Bank was indeed concerned about Nova Dynamics' management transition. Dean estimated we could buy the $17 million debt at a discount, probably around 88 cents on the dollar, which meant we needed roughly $14,900,000. I told him I wanted to bring in our key aerospace clients and private equity firms as co-investors. We would form a special purpose vehicle, a limited liability company, to purchase and hold the debt. If we succeeded, we would have the leverage to protect the division, or even spin it out as an independent company. Dean agreed to act as our financial advisor and contact the bank. Over the next 2 weeks, we worked in absolute secrecy. If the executives at Nova Dynamics found out what we were doing, they would immediately refinance the debt or accelerate our liquidation. My first call was to Wesley Hoffman at Apex Flight Systems. We met in person at a quiet hotel lounge near the airport. Wesley Hoffman was a tall, serious man who had spent 30 years in the aerospace industry. When we sat down at the table, he looked tired, the pressure of keeping their production lines running clearly weighing on him. "Brian," he had said, "our entire next-generation commercial jet series depends on your sensors. If Nova Dynamics shuts your division down, we cannot just buy these sensors off the shelf. They are custom designed to fit our engines and communicate with our flight control software. If we have to find a new supplier, it will trigger a full recertification process with the Federal Aviation Administration. That means our new aircraft will be grounded for at least 18 months, and we will lose millions of dollars in penalties to our airline customers." I explained to him that my plan would not only protect his supply chain, but would also give Apex Flight Systems a direct voice in our operations. He listened, nodding slowly, and I could see the panic in his eyes transform into strategic calculation. I asked Apex to commit $3 million to our investment group. Wesley understood the math. Finding and qualifying a new sensor supplier would take them at least 18 months and cost far more than $3 million in delayed aircraft deliveries. Within 3 days, their board approved the investment. Next, I contacted Roger Drummond, a partner at Watershed Capital Partners, a firm that specialized in corporate carve-outs. Roger was thrilled by the strategy and committed $4 million from his fund. I brought in 2 retired industry executives who put in $2 million each, and I committed my own $2,800,000, which represented my entire life savings and a mortgage on my home. By early October, our investment coalition was fully assembled. We named our entity Summit Crest LLC. On October 18th, exactly 6 months and 2 weeks after Pierce Bradley had joined Nova Dynamics, I sat in the downtown office of Continental Commerce Bank and signed the acquisition documents. Summit Crest LLC purchased the $17 million debt for exactly $14,900,000. The transaction was registered in the public system, but it was buried under hundreds of daily corporate filings. I was betting that Bradley and the chief executive officer were too busy focusing on their spreadsheets to notice a change in their debt holder. But I did not stop there. I needed a backup plan, a final defensive shield to protect my team. I spent several nights reviewing our division's patent portfolio. That was when I discovered something shocking. Our division's most valuable technology was the high-temperature piezoelectric sensor, protected by patent number 9,845,212. This patent utilized specialized gallium phosphate crystals to withstand temperatures up to 600 degrees Celsius in aerospace engines. According to our employment contracts, any transfer or licensing of this technology to an outside entity required the written consent and signature of both co-inventors. Yet, when I looked at the internal files in our document management system, I found a signed patent assignment agreement dated 3 weeks prior, transferring the exclusive rights of patent number 9,845,212 to a private equity shell company owned by Pierce Bradley's former associates. I stared at the digital document in disbelief. The signature page bore my name and Alan's name, but the handwriting was completely wrong. I had never signed this document, and neither had Alan. Bradley, in his rush to package our division's assets for a lucrative sale to his friends, had forged our signatures. Before the meeting started, I had spent the night double-checking the exact wording of the patent laws and California statutes. I knew that the legal leverage we had was absolute, but it required perfect execution. Alan Walsh was nervous, his hands shaking slightly as he held his notebook. He kept looking at me, asking if we were really going to go through with this. I told him to trust the process. The 2 consultants sitting next to Bradley were young, recently graduated from prestigious universities, and they looked at us with a mixture of pity and indifference. To them, we were just numbers on a spreadsheet that needed to be cleaned up. Bradley began reading from his slides, his voice smooth and empty. He talked about how Nova Dynamics needed to return to its core competencies, which meant thermal management, and how specialty divisions like ours were too volatile. He presented charts showing our operational overhead, claiming that our manufacturing facility sat idle for 40% of the time, which he called an unacceptable waste of resources. I listened without interrupting, noting down the errors in his calculations. He did not mention the 3 new contracts we were about to sign, nor did he mention the patent that he had forged. He finished his presentation by looking at me, expecting a fight or a plea for mercy. I immediately called Alan Walsh and met him at his house on a rainy Wednesday night. He lived in a quiet suburb, his garage filled with old electronic components and prototypes he had built over the years. When I showed him the document on my tablet, his face turned from confusion to deep anger. He clenched his fists, staring at his forged signature. "I never signed this, Brian," he whispered. "I would never agree to transfer our years of hard work to some nameless shell company." I told him to stay calm, explaining that Bradley had made a fatal mistake. I realized Bradley had committed a serious crime under California Penal Code, Section 470, which covers the forgery of legal documents and contracts. In the state of California, forging a signature on a commercial contract or patent assignment is a felony offense that carries a penalty of up to 3 years in prison. Because our signatures were forged, the assignment agreement was void ab initio, a legal term meaning void from the very beginning. The shell company had no legal right to our technology. Furthermore, under Federal Law 35 U.S.C., Section 271, any unauthorized use or sale of our patented technology by Nova Dynamics or the shell company constituted direct patent infringement. I had Bradley completely trapped. He had not only put the company in a position of default by violating our debt covenants, but he had also committed a state felony and exposed Nova Dynamics to massive federal patent litigation. I had my lawyer secure certified copies of the forged document and prepare a formal affidavit signed by Alan and myself. We kept this information completely quiet, waiting for the right moment to strike. The opportunity arrived just 2 days later when I received a calendar invite for a divisional integration meeting. On Thursday morning was cold and rainy. I walked into the main conference room with my team of 4 engineers and 2 project managers. Pierce Bradley was already sitting at the head of the table, looking smug. He had 2 of his consultants sitting beside him, their laptops open. He did not bother to stand up or greet us. He simply pointed to the chairs and told us to sit down. He opened his presentation and began reading his analysis, using all the standard corporate jargon. He talked about resource optimization, high overhead costs, and risk exposure in the aerospace sector. He concluded by saying that the division was being liquidated immediately, and we had until noon to pack our personal belongings. When Pierce Bradley finished his presentation, the conference room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. My team members sat in shock, unable to believe that 12 years of hard work were being wiped out in a single meeting. Bradley looked at me with an insufferable grin, clearly expecting me to beg for a better severance package or argue about our numbers. That was when he leaned forward and uttered the words he would soon regret. "You are dead weight here, Brian," he said. I did not flinch. I slowly set down my ceramic coffee mug and stood up. I looked at Bradley and then at his consultants. "I understand your position," I said calmly. "I need to make a few quick phone calls regarding the transition. I will return shortly." Bradley waved his hand dismissively, telling me to make it quick because building security would begin escorting us out by noon. I walked out of the room, leaving my team looking confused and worried. I went straight to my desk, picked up my phone, and called Dean Rollins. "It is time," I said. "Trigger phase 2. Dean confirmed the instructions and hung up. What occurred over the next 20 minutes was a coordinated legal strike. As the authorized representative of Summit Crest LLC, Dean sent a formal legal notice to Milton Burgess, the chief accountant of Nova Dynamics, and to the board of directors. The notice informed them that Summit Crest LLC was now the sole owner of the $17 million revolving credit debt. Furthermore, because Nova Dynamics had executed a material restructuring and liquidated multiple divisions over the past 6 months, without creditor consent, they had violated the operational covenants of the loan agreement. Summit Crest LLC was exercising its legal right to accelerate the debt, demanding full repayment of $17 million within 30 days, or we would begin immediate foreclosure proceedings. I stood by the window near our department, watching the corporate offices across the hall. Within 10 minutes, the calm atmosphere turned into absolute chaos. Milton Burgess, the chief accountant, came running down the hallway with his tie crooked and his face completely pale. He did not even knock on Bradley's office door. He just burst inside, waving a folder of papers. Through the glass walls, I watched Bradley stand up, his smug expression instantly vanishing as Milton handed him the notice. Shortly after, the chief executive officer, Ronald Jenkins, arrived, marching down the hall with a look of pure fury on his face. He entered the office, closed the door, and pulled down the blinds. As I walked toward the elevator, I could feel the eyes of my team on me. Alan Walsh and Gordon Torres were standing by the printer, watching me with a mixture of hope and fear. I gave them a reassuring nod. The elevator ride to the top floor was quiet, the only sound being the soft chime as we passed each floor. The executive wing was dead silent, a stark contrast to the panic I had witnessed in Bradley's office just minutes before. The receptionist did not look at me as she opened the heavy double doors of the boardroom. When I entered, the room felt cold, the air thick with tension. The silver-haired outside counsel, Howard Simmons, was whispering to Ronald Jenkins, while Harriet Blackwell was feverishly reviewing the debt agreements on her tablet. Pierce Bradley sat in the corner, his face pale and sweat glistening on his forehead. He looked at me as I walked in, his earlier arrogance completely gone, replaced by a desperate, defensive glare. I sat at the far end of the table, placing my folder in front of me, ready for the final confrontation. My manufacturing director, Gordon Torres, walked over to me, looking bewildered. "Brian, what is going on? The executive wing looks like it is on fire." I smiled and told him to keep packing, but to take his time. I assured him that we were not going anywhere today. A few minutes later, my desk phone rang. It was the executive assistant, telling me that Jenkins wanted to see me immediately in the top-floor boardroom. When I walked into the boardroom, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. 5 people were sitting around the long mahogany table. Ronald Jenkins, Pierce Bradley, Milton Burgess, our general counsel Harriet Blackwell, and an older attorney named Howard Simmons, who was the company's outside legal counsel. The room was cold, the air smelling of stale coffee and expensive cologne. Jenkins did not waste any time. "Brian, sit down," he barked. He looked like a man whose house was burning down, his usual polished demeanor replaced by a raw, desperate anxiety. He explained that a firm called Summit Crest LLC had purchased their $17 million bank debt and was demanding immediate payment. Milton had informed him that the company did not have that much cash on hand, and a default would force them into bankruptcy, wiping out their stock value and destroying their reputations. Jenkins looked at me with cold fury, his fingers digging into the edge of the table. "Are you aware of this, Brian?" I looked him in the eye and said, "Yes, I am. I am the managing member of Summit Crest LLC." Pierce Bradley jumped out of his chair, his face turning red. "This is a conflict of interest," he shouted. "You are an employee of this company. This is extortion." I looked at him calmly and replied, "As of 30 minutes ago, you terminated my employment and called me dead weight. I am no longer your employee. I am your primary creditor." Howard Simmons, the outside counsel, cleared his throat and tried to take control of the meeting. "Ms. Blackwell and I have reviewed the situation," he said. "While this transaction is highly unusual, purchasing corporate debt on the open market is a completely lawful transaction. However, demanding immediate acceleration based on restructuring covenants could lead to a long and expensive legal battle. What is it that you want, Mr. Vance?" I opened my folder and placed a document on the table. "Before we discuss the $17 million debt, we need to address a much more serious issue," I said. I pushed the forged patent assignment agreement toward Jenkins. I explained that 3 weeks ago, Pierce Bradley forged my signature and Alan Walsh's signature to transfer patent number 9,845,212 to a shell company. I presented our signed affidavits and the forensic analysis showing the signatures were forged. Bradley turned pale and tried to speak, but Jenkins raised his hand to silence him. I turned to Harriet Blackwell. Under California Penal Code Section 470, forgery is a felony, I said. Because the signatures were forged, this contract is void ab initio, a legal term meaning void from the very beginning. The shell company has no rights to our technology. Furthermore, because they have already begun marketing this technology, Nova Dynamics is currently in direct violation of federal patent laws under 35 U.S.C. Section 271. Any attempt to liquidate our division and sell these assets will result in immediate federal patent infringement lawsuits, treble damages, and criminal prosecution for forgery. The boardroom went completely silent. Harriet Blackwell reviewed the documents and whispered to Jenkins, "He is right. The signature is an obvious forgery, and the legal exposure is catastrophic." Jenkins stared at Bradley with a look of pure disgust. "Pack your things and get out of my sight," Jenkins said, his voice quiet but deadly. "You are fired, Pierce." Bradley tried to argue, but Jenkins pointed to the door. Bradley slowly stood up and walked out, his corporate career ruined. Jenkins turned back to me, his attitude completely changed. "What are your terms, Brian?" I laid them out clearly. First, the piezoelectric sensor division is not liquidated. It will become a wholly owned subsidiary called Nova Sensor Technologies, with complete operational autonomy and myself as president. Second, every employee terminated this morning is reinstated with full back pay. Third, Summit Crest LLC will restructure the $17 million debt into a 5-year note at an interest rate of 6.5%, allowing Nova Dynamics to avoid bankruptcy. Jenkins looked at the lawyers, who both nodded. "We have a deal," Jenkins said, shaking my hand. The legal agreements took 3 weeks to finalize, but everything was implemented exactly as demanded. Alan Walsh was promoted to Vice President of Engineering, and Gordon Torres took over Advanced Manufacturing. On the day the final signatures were placed on the restructuring agreement, I called a meeting of the entire division. We gathered in the main lab, surrounded by testing equipment and prototypes. I told them everything. The secret acquisition of the bank debt, the 6 months of planning, the forged patent document, and the final meeting in the boardroom. The room was completely silent for a moment, and then Gordon Torres let out a loud laugh that echoed through the room. He shook my hand, saying he had always known I had something up my sleeve. Alan Walsh had tears in his eyes, realizing that his career and his family's future were secure. We went out for drinks that night, celebrating our victory over the corporate machine. Over the next 3 years, Nova Sensor Technologies thrived. We expanded our contracts with Apex Flight Systems and brought in new clients from the medical and automotive industries. Our revenue grew from $23 million to $41 million, and eventually to $78 million with over 200 employees. In our 3rd year, Nova Dynamics repaid the restructured $17 million debt in full, 21 months ahead of schedule. Jenkins called me personally to apologize for his initial mistakes, admitting that spreadsheets do not show the true value of a business. Today we are preparing for our initial public offering, and that old ceramic coffee mug still sits on my desk as a reminder of the day I refused to let an arrogant executive turn my team into dead weight. Reflecting on the journey, the most satisfying part of this revenge was not watching Pierce Bradley walk out with his cardboard box, nor was it the financial windfall our investors received. It was seeing the relief on the faces of my team when I told them their jobs were safe. We had stood up to the corporate machine and won, not by underhanded tactics, but by using the law and the financial system to protect what we built. My sister Clara, who now runs her own small business, tells me that our mother would have been proud of how we fought for the people who trusted us. I think she is right. In a world where corporate executives often see people as disposable resources, we proved that human loyalty and technical excellence are the most valuable assets. As I look out the window of my office, watching the next generation of engineers, I know that every single cup of coffee from this old mug was worth it.